There's an argument that says that, well, the human brain is just a machine. The human brain is a machine, is a big data processing machine that basically is doing exactly what the AI is doing. It's basically predicting the next word in the next sentence.
This, I think, is really interesting. This idea that the human brain is just a machine. I mean, it's true, we do predictions. There's a whole load of stuff on predictive coding, which is very interesting. So a lot of what goes on at the subpersonal level is a kind of what's called a Bayesian machine. It's a way of taking in all this data and then generating predictions in a very elegant way. And that's definitely true. But none of that means that the mind is like a machine. Every epoch has its sort of metaphor for human cognition. If you go back to the early modern period, it was machine in the sense of clockwork, right? They looked at clocks and they thought, human beings like clock. And then now we think it's like a computer, because computers are very dominant. So we think, there's like software going on. It's like a machine and the software running on like the hardware sort of thing. But one thing I think we learned in the 20th century, this is the whole Chomsky program, is just quite how incredible what it is the human cognition is doing. And in order to understand this, I think we have to go back to our origin story, the origin story of human cognition. It all happens. This doesn't get taught. I'm surprised it doesn't get taught. It should be taught because people should know this, because it's so fascinating. About 50,000 years ago, we can pretty much date it. We achieve what's called behavioral modernity. That is, the creatures that have been walking around for 300,000 years, physically the same as us, no physical change, suddenly started behaving like we behave. That is, they started having culture, they started having language, they started doing art, they started having massive use of tools and artifacts, rituals. They started living in larger groups, right? You need language to do that and so on. Their cognition suddenly exploded. We don't really know exactly what, we know something happened, right? We can date it because we can look back at the historical record. We see that something happens. It's not an evolutionary process in a direct sense, because it happens in evolutionary terms in the blink of an eye, just over a few thousand years. We go from being these creatures that have been unchanged for like 250,000 years, no real difference. Suddenly we become these very different creatures, and everything else that we've done follows from that. The mass migrations into Europe, the early civilizations along the banks of the Nile, and later the Tigris and Euphrates, and the banks of the Indus, and so on. Civilizations, culture, it comes from that. And it's all tied to language. There's this amazing capacity we have to understand an unlimited number of sentences. And what's crucial about that cognitive capacity is that it's not machine-like. It's not like taking huge amounts of data and then just generating small numbers of predictions, which is what the machines are doing. It's actually an inversion of that. Small amounts of data. I mean, this is what's so elegant about it. We couldn't do the big data. We just don't have the capacity. We do the small data, and what we generate aren't predictions, but something much more sophisticated, which is explanations. And this is what I was saying about like being in the space of reasons. We're responsive to reasons. Explanations are a much more sophisticated kind of thing. The machine can just predict things, but to explain things is much harder. It's like to see how things connect to one another, to start to understand how things connect. That's one thing the machine just doesn't have. And that's what I mean by saying that the machine, I think, and that the whole analogy of the mind to a machine is really unhelpful.